Welcome to our conversation tonight. We're here with Jeff Steinberg, a really good friend of mine. We've been friends for a long time, and I'm excited to just share with you his life and the ministry that he has, get some insights. You know, we come every week, Jeff, or every 2 weeks. We come in to give people an opportunity just to find some inspiration or find something that they can learn, or just something that they can apply to their life to grow. And we're excited to have you tonight. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad to be here. I've been waiting for a long time to be able to do this with you.
I know. I'm sure you have. This could get very interesting and very dicey.
Well, you told me a long time ago we were going to do this, and I'm like, okay, when's he going to call me?
Yeah.
When's he going to call me?
So we've been, this will be the first of probably many. So you and I have known each other for a long time. I think everybody should have a token Jewish friend.
Okay.
And you're mine.
Okay.
So,
and you're my token goy.
Yeah, there you go. So we met back in the 80s together, and that was a time when we were both traveling extensively, and we were doing different programs, and so I just want you to tell it from your perspective. I love the way you tell the story, so let's jump in right there.
I received a phone call from an Amway Diamond. Mm-hmm. You want me to go that far back?
Why? Yeah.
I had just been through...
We got 25 minutes.
All right. I had just been through a terrible divorce, probably not as terrible as some that I've been, and I was trying to kind of pick up the pieces, and I got this call from an Amway Diamond, and he said, I need a favor. There's this Christian camp for the handicapped and they need a guest speaker for the evening's events. And I said, sure. Where is it? Waupaca, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where?
Yeah.
You want me to go there? Are they flying me? No, you just drive up.
Well,
and we were in North Carolina at the time. And so I went up. My assistant and I had a custom van with a matching trailer. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. I remember when you pulled onto the property.
And we pulled on, and I got out of the van at the lodge, or at the, office, and you came out, and you said, hi, you must be Jeff. I'm Jim Huckel, and I'm the speaker for the morning sessions. And I started to think to myself, oh no, not another handicapped guy. And that next morning, you were doing a series on Job. Now, I'm skipping some because when we set up, you told me you were a singer. And at the time, I thought to myself, well, let's see what he's got. And I gave you a microphone, remember?
I remember that.
And I sent you down to the front of the room, and I got to run sound. You gave me a track and totally blew me away.
I was really good, wasn't I?
Yeah, you were. You sang No More Night.
Yeah, I remember.
And just blew the doors off the place. We couldn't have done it in concert as loud as we did it that night. But it was, that was fun.
I was rattling for that little chapel for sure.
So
before you get into the impact of that moment, though, I have to tell you a little bit of my side of the story.
Okay.
I was like fresh out of college. Didn't have a lot of experience, and I went to this camp program that I'd been to a couple of years beforehand, and they let me know right away that this really big star was coming into the campus, and that I needed to be, they put me kind of in my place, like I was the morning guy, and you were the big evening star. So that was the pretense in which I was operating.
I didn't know this. So the next morning I decided I was going to get up and go see what you were all about.
Yeah.
And I sat back at the board because I didn't have to sing or speak that morning, and I just thought I'd listen.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Job and Job's comforters. And you had an interesting perspective, because everybody talks about Job's comforters like they were giving him such bad advice. You know, if you really, really, really want to know what not to do, listen to Job's comforters. Well, that was not your perspective. Your perspective was that maybe these guys weren't so stupid after all. And you were talking about Eliphaz. And you said that if Eliphaz were here today, he would look Job in the eye and say, "So Job, so you're hurt, big deal." You remember this?
Yeah.
Are you the only one that's ever hurt? And then you look straight back at me at the board. You don't know that you did this, but you did. And you said, "Does the fact that you hurt invalidate all of the good God has done in your life?" Bam.
Yeah.
It was like a right hook. And then all of a sudden, I thought you were starting to repeat yourself, because preachers do that all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
We do.
And I said, so then you started, "Does the fact that you hurt invalidate all of the good God has done through your life?" And it was at that point that I looked up and I said, "Okay, Lord, whatever it is you want from me." And you had no idea what I had been through.
No.
All you had was this guy comes in, he's...
All I had in my mind was the burgundy car and the burgundy trailer.
Right, and the star that was coming
The star that was coming in.
Yeah. And so we did this week, and we became really, really good friends, and then we talked for a while, and I looked at my wife and I said, "I want to invite him to come live with us." And because I was going to help you get back out on the road,
Right.
and I couldn't do that with you being in Virginia and me being, you know,
Right.
in another state. So we lived in the same house, and we had a ball. We got to
did.
do Amway shows together. We
that's
got to
true.
do churches together, and
Some of the largest audiences I was in front of were with you.
Yep. You're welcome.
So you have one of the things that I remember the most about that house was going in there, and one whole wall was just this a wall of plaques and awards and all this kind of stuff. Give our folks a little idea of what your history has been in the biz.
Well, I've recorded 11 albums over the course of my life. Probably not nearly remarkable compared to others, but I've always made it a point to make sure that every album I did had a theme.
Yeah.
And it starts at one point and it finishes at another, and somewhere in there is at least one song for kids that has some craziness in it.
Yeah.
And I've always been the class clown, even when I was in school as a kid. And so my history is that in 1972 I appeared alongside Doug Oldham on the Old Time Gospel Hour television program. It was October 29th, 1972. It was a Sunday morning, and it launched my full-time career. And from that point, I have been all over the continental United States several times. I've driven all over the continental United States several times. I have been up in Canada, Prince Edward Island, and I've been to several countries, including Europe and the United Kingdom and Central America. I've had the privilege of standing on stages with people like Zig Ziglar. I've been privileged to sing on a stage with Mother Teresa. You know, all the other celebrities that I've been with, they diminish when you're talking about people like like Mother Teresa, because here's this woman who was just barely taller than I am, and she was just the most humble, most amazing person.
Cool. That's cool.
You know, and it was wonderful. I have been blessed to be the recipient of the Artist Music Guild Heritage
Yeah.
Award for Comedian of the Year.
Yeah.
I've received several awards from Amway groups. Not for anything I did in Amway, only what I've done on stage.
Right, right.
For them. I've stood on stage with people like the Stamps Quartet, who did backup for Elvis. And all of the places that I've been able to go have just been, I've lived my life doing the very things that family and friends and relatives have told me I couldn't do, shouldn't do, or wouldn't do.
That's good. So going back kind of through that, I want for you to share with me where it all kind of started and what's the, because you overcame, in order for you to get to the highest points of your career in life, you had to go through some pretty devastating and very difficult moments to get there. And so I know, well, just tell me about your birth, tell me about your family, and kind of what went from there.
I was that terrible thing that happened to Irving and Ruthie Steinberg. August 18, 1951. I was, my mother was having trouble keeping the pregnancy. And her doctor, who was from France, told her about a new medication that would help her with spotting, with nausea, with, you know, all of that. It would boost her immune system. And so she took the medication, and I was born with no arms. I was born with nothing on this shoulder. Both of my legs were scissored, kind of crisscross, kind of like an Indian sits in a powwow. And my grandmother was the first family member to see me. And she called the post office where my father worked in Philadelphia. And when they finally got a hold of him, because this is 1951, you know, there weren't cell phones or pagers or anything like that. And she said, "Irving, come quick. It's the baby. He's not right." I've been told that for a long time.
I've probably said that a few times, actually.
You're not right.
You're not right, Jim.
Yeah. And so my father got to the hospital, took one look at me, and decided that the doctors were not to tell my mom. She was not to know anything about my disability, because the doctors weren't sure if I was going to live. And the short version of the story is that that my grandmother and my father got into it really big, because my grandmother didn't think he was right. And she told him so. And he literally looked at her and told her, "If you tell her, I will kill you."
Wow.
And
that's serious.
He was angry. And when I was 17 months old, my grandmother came into the kitchen, sat down behind my mom at the table, and while she was making dinner, and said, "He's alive, Ruthie." My mom stopped what she was working on, and she just didn't.
So for the first 18 months,
she didn't know.
She didn't know that her son was alive.
She didn't even know I was a boy. I mean,
she didn't know her child then.
Yeah, she didn't have any idea about me.
Wow.
And I was the topic of a whole lot of unspoken conversations. You know, the unspoken topic. And so Mom stopped, and she just said, "Mom, why won't they let me see him? Is he ugly?" And my grandmother stood up, and she walked over to my mom. She put her arm around her, and she said, "No, Ruthie, he's not ugly. He's beautiful. He has a Yiddish cup, a Jewish head, a Jewish face." But I got to tell you, Jim, I would not have wanted to have been at dinner that night.
No, I wouldn't think that would be a fun dinner to be a part of.
That was not a fun place to be at that particular point. My mom did not get to see me for the first time until I was almost 2 years old.
Wow.
In a children's welfare shelter in Philadelphia. When I was 2.5, I was placed into the care of the Shriners Hospital for crippled children. I learned to do all kinds of things. I was operated, they straightened my leg, and because there was no joint in the knee, they fused the leg back together again, which they should have waited several years to do because they damaged growth tissue. Anytime you do a fusion, it damages growth tissue. And so my right leg is shorter than my left, and I'll always be 4 feet 6 inches tall.
There you go.
Michael Jordan, eat your heart out.
Yeah. But there were many more moments when you were, I remember you telling me about other times in your life where people that you loved left you behind for various reasons or so.
Well, after I left Shriners Hospital,
yeah,
I was in a foster care situation. I lived at home for a total of 9 months, but it got to be too hard for my mom and dad to take care of me.
And how old were you then?
And 3 girls. I was 9.
9 years old before you had your first opportunity to live at home.
Yeah, and I lived at home for 9 months. It got to be too hard for my mom and dad to take care of me and 3 girls.
Yeah.
It was the girls that were the problem. It's always the girls that are the problem.
Well, knowing you, I'm thinking to myself, it probably has nothing to do with physical care or anything like that.
No, it really didn't.
It was probably a lot about mischievous activity.
Well, it was always, Mom, I don't have anything to wear.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff. But see, I was always the kid that wanted to go out and be like everybody else.
Right.
I wanted to be a neighbor kid. I wanted to be a grandson.
Right.
I wanted to be and it got to be too hard, so I was placed into foster care.
Okay.
But my relationship with my mom and dad was strained because things that I did that I don't talk about now, foster mom, found black and blue marks on my butt, stuff like that, that wouldn't be tolerated today. But the truth is, so all of a sudden I was there for about 8 weeks, and I got told, well, we've got to pack your stuff because your mom and dad are coming to pick you up. I thought I was going to get to go home. Yeah. And they drove me 63 miles to the Good Shepherd home. And they unpacked my suitcase, and they told me I was going to live there. And I watched them drive away in their 1960 Pontiac.
And how old were you then?
I was 10. I was 9. It was toward, and
you probably still remember that.
Yeah, I remember looking out at the window saying, "I'll be good. Don't leave me here. I'll be good." And I remember just crying and thinking, I'm not going to stay in this place. And from Good Shepherd, I went to school. I met a wonderful couple who taught me a principle that became the guiding principle of my life. It's found in the book of Psalms 139:14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. There's another version that says, I am made to be awesome and wonderful. And it became the guiding principle for me. Because if you don't like who you are, ain't nobody going to want what you have.
So at what point did you look at yourself and say, wow, I'm okay?
I went to high school. I was part of the junior high talent show. I did talent contests and won. Singing. I did. I graduated from high school with a class of 771. And I remember my mom and dad telling me, I told them I was leaving Good Shepherd and I was going to go to Bible school and I was going to become a preacher. And that was the night, on a Wednesday night, that they told me that if you do this, you're on your own. You do your own thing. If it doesn't work, don't call us. We will not take care of you.
These are your birth parents.
These are my birth parents.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, if threatening to leave Good Shepherd was all it took to get him to come visit me that
Yeah.
night. I would have done it every week.
Right, right.
But I didn't know that. And then they added this little caveat. If you change your mind by Saturday, call us and we'll come to graduation from high school. Otherwise, we won't be there.
Wow.
And I remember laying in my bed. I looked at the ceiling. I didn't see any holy glow. I didn't hear from heaven. Nothing. I just said to the ceiling, God, if you're there, you've been there for me a lot more than they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could hear this voice in my head say, stick with me, Jeff. You and I will go places, and we'll do a lot of good. The next morning I got up, went to church, went to Muhlenberg Hall at Muhlenberg College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I'm walking in the hallway, and to my right is the auditorium, the gymnasium. And down the hall about, 200, 300 feet, a door opens, and a little girl starts walking in my direction. Well, I just figured she was going to walk past me. I didn't know who she was, till she got close enough, and then she started to run and threw her arms around me, and it was my little sister. And she said, I just want you to know that Mom and Dad are in the bleachers, and I just wanted you to know we came.
Wow.
And it was like the arms of God had just wrapped around me, and he said,
cool.
You stick with me, Jeff. He says, you and I are going to go places, and we're going to do a lot of good.
Yeah.
And we're going to help people.
Well, as we've stated already, we've been friends for a long time, and I know a lot of the second half of some of those stories, and more disappointments and more being left behind and things like that. I've lived through some of those moments with you.
And some of the disappointments were mine.
Yeah.
They were of my own doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that happens too. But you have a song that I think a friend of yours wrote for you, and it's called Masterpiece in Progress.
I was in California.
Yep.
I was in Van Nuys, California, at First Baptist Church, and I was doing a revival for a week. And one particular night, Jeff Rudloff, the guy you're talking about, was my keyboard player, and we sang together. And I said to the audience, I said, each of us is becoming one color at a time, a masterpiece. And I said, sometimes the colors blend into something even more beautiful. And sometimes they stand in stark contrast.
Yeah.
And I finished the week. My series was called All That I Can Be, Learning and Living God's Unique Design. And we recorded it. And Jeff came to me on Monday, called me on Monday, and he says, I've got the title song for your next album. He said, would you like to hear the lyrics? Jeff never gives me an advance on the lyrics. I said, sure. He said, I'm a masterpiece in progress. I may not look like it yet, but you better bet I'm becoming all he wants me to be. I'm a masterpiece in progress. It won't be too long till I'm done.
Yeah.
A few more strokes of the brush and the master's touch, and I'll be in the image of the Son. And it became a theme for me, because everybody, and you and I talked about this earlier, everybody's got a story to tell, but most of us don't like our story.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm too tall, I'm too short, my ears stick out, my nose is too big, I've got freckles, I've got zits, my freckles have zits. You know, we can always find excuses.
Yeah.
But we cannot allow ourselves to be defined by our circumstance. But if we'll allow it,
Yeah.
our circumstance can refine us make us better, make us stronger, make us more focused, make us purer, cleaner.
Yeah.
And I faced divorce. That was something I never dreamed I'd ever have.
Yeah.
It hurt. I felt like a failure. I faced all kinds of things. And it reminds me that your identity is not in what you look like or in what you do. You don't walk up and say, "Hi, I'm Jim Huckel and I direct a ministry."
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
You walk up and you say, "Hi, I'm Jim Huckel."
Right.
And you can't possibly believe all the good things God has done in my life.
I think that's really hard for a lot of people that face disability long term. I also think it's hard for parents, being able to face the realities of a child who's going to have limitations in their life, and how do they shield them from the monsters of the community, as well as give them opportunities to dream realistic dreams. I think a lot of that takes place over, through the lives. But I'm just astounded. I'm amazed when I think about the little boy who's standing at the window saying, "I'll be good, I'll be good," and the man that little boy has become to be able to proclaim to the world that I'm a masterpiece.
I called my mom when I was getting ready to do my book. You and I are friends with Johnny Erickson Tata.
Right.
And I called Johnny when I was getting ready to do my book.
Yeah.
And she said, "Be careful." She said, "Be very, very sure that you want to do this." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you're going to relive every terrible thing that's ever happened to you in spades." So I called my mom and I said, I'm working with someone and we want to come and do an interview. And she said, "No." She said, "It's my life." She said, "It's nobody else's business." And I looked at her, I looked at the phone and I said, "Mom, your story can be an inspiration to thousands of people."
Yeah.
Because how many times did you ever even wish or dream that your son could stand on a stage or drive a car and somebody asked me once, they said, "How do you drive?" And I said, "Fast."
Yeah. Real fast.
Yeah, real fast, yeah. But your story, my story, is not just the story of Jeff Steinberg, it's also the story of Ruthie and Irving.
And don't you think it's the story of God?
Sure it is. And it's the story of every parent who has said, "God, what in the world are you doing in my life?"
Yeah.
And so I look at my life and I look at what I have to offer. And I wrote the book. And then when I got ready to do the audiobook for it, I called Johnny again. Oh, by the way, Johnny wrote something for my book.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, she wrote a backliner for it. And then when I said I was going to do the audiobook, and she said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, "No, but I'm going to do it." And she said, "Who's narrating it?" And I said, "I am." She said, "You will definitely relive a lot." And trust me, I broke down in tears a couple of times.
Yeah.
Because the hurts don't go away.
Right.
They just get perspective.
Right. And they do become building blocks.
Sure they do.
Yeah. So Jeff, I know there's a lot that we can share with people about how to move from that loneliness and that rejection to becoming a masterpiece. We're going to have you come back to really go through a lot of that.
I got to tell you one thing. One way to move forward with is humor.
Yes, absolutely.
I had a 5-year-old that wanted to know why I didn't have any hands.
And?
I told him I used to bite my fingernails, and one day I went too far.
Too far.
He's in trauma therapy.
Yeah.
He hasn't bit or clipped his fingernails since. The boy's got claws.
By the way, I've heard that story a lot.
Yeah, you have. But what makes
it's a great story, though.
But what makes it funny and what makes it's what gets you to the next point is that you don't look at your life as a tragedy. You look at your life in terms of, okay, what can I do to make this better or funnier? I got in a lot of trouble because I was the class clown. You know, I remember when I was in high school, and I used first day, sophomore year, math class, got the seat right by the door. My teacher told the class I'd be leaving early. So as I got up to leave that first class, he told everybody, you know, Jeff's going to be leaving early. I said, "My Mr. Dunmoyer," I said, "don't think this hasn't been fun," because it hasn't.
Yeah.
You know, you try to make light
Yeah.
of what hurts.
Yeah. Well, as I said, there's going to be a lot of things we're going to dig into over time, and I think it's high time that you and I get a lot of our story on video and get the kind of the blessings that we've shared together and the understandings and dialogues that we've had over time. But for today, if you would just take 2 minutes and speak directly to the camera and speak directly to the hearts of our families and give them 1 or 2 little tidbits of encouragement.
I'm working on a book at the moment, and I've got a tentative title called "Some Assembly Required."
Yeah.
And it's got a picture of me looking down at my arm and my leg and, you know, my hook and my hand.
Remember the song I used to
Pieces.
sing?
Yeah, the Imperials.
Yeah.
So many pieces to my life. Well, that's kind of what inspired
a leg
that
in a
title.
corner, a hook on the wall.
Yeah. In that book, I address 5 points. First, know who you are. If you don't like who you are, why would anybody want what you have to offer? Why would anybody believe that God is good if you think he messed up on you? Okay? Everybody's got a story to tell. You heard mine. Second, take stock of what you bring to the table, your abilities and your limitations. Look, I can do a lot. I drive a car, I stand on stage and sing. You know, we've already talked about that. But what are the things I cannot do? Like give myself a bath, get dressed, all the things nobody really wants to talk about. But in order for me to have the successes, I have to trudge through and acknowledge the limitations, because it's other people that have helped me to get to where I am today.
Partners.
Right. Third thing, why am I here? Mark Twain said that the 2 most important days in a man's life is first the day he's born, and then the day he finds out why he was born. All of the struggles, all of the past, all of the story doesn't mean much if I don't have a sense of the purpose. Everybody's looking for purpose. And for me, it's about making a difference. It's about having an impact. It's about leaving a smile or a song. Fourth, what are my limits and my boundaries? I said my limitations are the things I cannot do. My limits are the things I will not do. I will not sacrifice my morality for $1, and I will not give up my good name for a gig.
Yeah.
Boundaries keep me from having to go too far and then have to come back and do it all over again. And finally, and there's a lot more to unpack in that.
Sure.
And finally, what kind of a mark will I leave behind for having been here? Now, I'm not talking about when we're in a box and somebody says, doesn't he look like himself? Mm-hmm. I'm talking about every single day, in a big way, in a small way, we leave a mark in people's lives. The question is, what are you going to do? What kind of a mark do you want to leave behind? What kind of a difference will you make in people's lives? I remember singing at a church, a chapel in England. and a prisoner, arms the size of tree trunks, looked like a young version of Michael Clark Duncan, the actor, the late actor. He said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "You see that window be over your shoulder?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I said, "You see that razor wire on the other side of the window with the bars?" "Yeah." "In about an hour, I'm going to be on the other side of that fence, and you're still going to be in jail." Whether it's England or America, it's still called jail.
Right.
You know. I said, "I'm here to tell you that you can look in the mirror and you can see a masterpiece, that you never have to see the guy that got you into this mess in the first place." 5 years later, I went back to that same prison. The chaplain said to me, she said, "Jeff," she said, "you don't know, do you?" Because I asked about that guy. I said, "What don't I know?" She said, "The night after you left," she said, "he and a bunch of guys in the common room, he made a commitment to faith and gave his life to the Lord." She said, "But that's not the best part of the story." I said, "Really?" She said the entire 8 weeks he had left in his sentence, all he talked about was a little man with no arms that got up in his face and changed his life and his newfound faith. But she said, "That's not the best part." I said, "Chaplain Barry, how does it get any better than that?" She said, "Because 8 weeks later, when he was released from this prison, he went back to Nigeria, and I just found out he became a pastor."
Wow.
That's the kind of mark I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kind that changes lives.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have arms to do it, or you don't have to be able to run fast.
Right.
It doesn't matter how you do it, whether you walk on wheels or whether you walk with braces or crutches. Just get busy. Find your place. Look at the masterpiece. And then say, "God, you and me, we'll stick together and we'll go places and we'll do things."
Yeah. Jeff, thank you. It's been great having you on for our conversation today. And
It's been fun.
It is good. I love it. I love it. So thank you for pointing us toward the masterpiece and the maker, the painter,
The artist.
the artist. And yeah, so it's great. Just remember, you're a masterpiece in progress, and just let God do that work in you. Have a great day.